Egoism. What is egoism? Well, before we can get into exactly what egoism is, we have to understand that there are two types of egoism: psychological egoism and ethical egoism. Psychological egoism is the view that all actions are done solely, ultimately, for the sake of self interest. This does not claim that all actions should be done solely for the sake of self interest. This view claims that there simply are they simply are done for the sake of self-interest. So it's descriptive. The view that actions should be done solely or ultimately for the sake of self-interest is ethical egoism. Ethical egoism is the view that you should act so as to bring about the best consequences for yourself. Again, the difference between ethical egoism and psychological egoism is that psychological egoism is descriptive. Psychological egoism amounts to a scientific theory. Thus, it is a description of reality. But is it true? No, it's not. Let's rip off this band-aid right now. The egoism claim that selfishness is natural in animals, particularly humans, is this claim falsifiable, or rather, can this claim be falsified with evidence? And well, yes. So while it's almost like the basic concept about it's almost like some basic concept about human nature is false. I mean, at least about nature, it is false. You see, when animals like elephants, elephant seals, when we see animals like elephant seals fighting each other, as we do in lots of nature documentaries, we're really seeing only a small sliver of time. Much more of their time is spent accommodating each other, respecting boundaries, and cooperation. And there's a tremendous amount of this cooperation in nature. As what concerns humans, most human beings pretty much, most human beings don't share food, at least not as much anymore. But we do cooperate in plenty of ways, from writing Wikipedia articles to forming lines in a bathroom. Indeed, some research suggests that our first instinct is to cooperate and not to compete. So, yeah, ethical egoism, psychological egoism is definitely false. Assumptions of psychological egoism. Acting for the sake of self-interest means voluntarily doing what you most want to do. Acting for the sake of self-interest means acting as so to bring about a positive state of consciousness for oneself. Acting for the sake of self-interest. Well, already repeated that. Anyway, if you think of one example that proves this theory wrong, then you must reject the theory. I mean, as a wholesale theory, anyway. As for human nature, and let's take an example. I mean, there's obviously the example about animals cooperating first. That's already enough right there. But we can keep going. It's just fun to just destroy this psychological egoism theory because it's so wrong. So, example: a cashier mistakenly gives you change for a $20 bill when you give her a $10 bill. Suppose you were a typical college student, which means you were broke. You could just walk out of the store and no one would ever find out what you did, but you return to the cashier and inform her of her mistake because it's the right thing to do. Consider this: say you're having trouble opening a cabinet, and there are small children assisting. Oh, say you have trouble opening a cabinet of something. There are cases of there are cases of small children assisting people with no reward, with no expectation of a reward. I fumbled over that sentence. So bees, when attacked, will by an overwhelming force, will sacrifice themselves for the sake of their offspring. Can you think of any examples where you didn't do exactly what you wanted to do? So acting for the sake of self-interest means acting as to bring about a pleasant state of consciousness for oneself. So imagine this: given the option, would you rather live in the knowledge, would you rather live with the knowledge that your family will be taken care of when you die. Uh, the catch being that they won't be, but you but you think they will be. Or would you rather live with the knowledge that your family won't be taken care of when you die, though they even though they will be? When you make this decision, your knowledge of decision when you make the decision, your knowledge making the decision will be erased. Which one will you pick? Would you rather, have the false knowledge or the actual knowledge? I mean, having the false knowledge is going to feel better, obviously. So I mean, that's you should seek to feel better. You should seek your self interest, right? And who cares about your family? They're not you. So psychological egoism, is wrong. Is psychological egoism is wrong? Question mark. Well, it appears that we have come up with enough reasons for psychological egoism is invalid as a scientific theory. Let's look at ethical egoism. An act is only right if and only if it produces a state of affairs whose consequences for the agent are no worse than the consequences of alternative states of affairs producible by any other action the agent could have performed. What is a good consequence? Whatever the agent deems valuable. The ethical egoist must consider what is the best state of affairs, the best consequence of each action they are considering will produce what is good in the long term. And maximize the long term goal. I didn't say any numbers for those first two. Anyway, let's evaluate this moral theory. Usually have people get into groups, but obviously we're not going to do that. So anyway, our rules, our methods, our rubric for evaluation. If we remember that, so I'm going to go over it. So consistency, ethical egoism does not yield consistent moral verdicts. Also, let me again say that we have a rubric for testing moral theories. This rubric consists of consistency, determinacy, applicability, internal support, external support, explanatory power, and publicity. So let's go back to consistency. So anyway, consistency. Ethical egoism does not yield consistent moral verdicts. Example: it is in America's best interest to stuff the ballot box and win the student council president election by cheating. However, it is in Jan's best interest to stop Marika because Jan wants a fair election. Jan doesn't have to respect Marika's desire. She only needs to pursue her best interest. So it seems consistent. I mean, there's some consistency. Determinacy. Although we don't always know what is best for us because we don't always have enough information, we must distinguish between the egoism's criterion of rightness and its decision procedure. So criterion of rightness for egoism, this simply means choosing the best consequence for yourself when you can reasonably do so. Decision procedure for the egoist, this is based on your evaluation of what you expect the consequences to be after a reasonable amount of sorting through the various consequences and facts available to you. Applicability. Ethical egoism certainly has an adequate decision-making procedure. The way in which one would the way which one would apply ethical egoism reliably would be to save intense calculations for those decisions that matter to me, and for trivial matters, one would live by a rule of thumb. Internal support. Does ethical egoism cohere with our considered moral beliefs? This is where ethical egoism gets a little problematic. It may be in my best interest to commit murder. Hobbes refutes this, saying that someone who does wrong to others will be found out and punished. This is not in their, thus it is not in their best interest to commit murder or adultery. Other problems with internal support. Hobbes is just wrong. First, think about the mafia bosses or dictators who live to the ripe old ages unpunished. Second, the source of morality can't simply be my interest, because this leaves the theoretical door open for murder and torture of innocence. Rule ethical egoism. So we're going to take a little break from the rubric in a second, talk about this briefly. So rule ethical egoism. tries to be deontological. Rule ethical egoism. According to rule ethical egoism, an act is right if and only if it conforms to a set of rules whose adherence by the agent produces consequences for the agent, which are, let me see, okay, which are no worse than the consequences producible by any other adhered to set of rules. This leaves the door open. This still leaves the door open to harming innocents if you can get away with it. So there we go. Actually, no, I think that was with internal. Well, whatever. Just another issue with internal support, obviously, because it doesn't work. So I guess that wasn't a break from the rubric. That's still playing into the rubric. So anyway, external support, non-moral beliefs that prop up or cohere to with the theory, that cohere to or with the theory, that prop up or cohere to with the theory. Non-moral beliefs that prop up or cohere with the theory. With the theory. Imagine a man who conforms to the demands of justice. This individual is always honest, fairly judgmental, and not well liked. Imagine a man who acts by their own self-interest. They look nice, they dress well, they are happier, and people around them are also happier. Consider this, however. Imagine if we stopped paying taxes, got rid of the police, and let everyone pursue their own interests. How would society look? Also, consider this. Take the claim that egoism, take the claim that egoism says the selfishness is natural in animals, and again, we already went over that with psychological egoism, that nature is not naturally selfish. And it's not naturally altruistic either, but it's also definitely not naturally selfish. So we already went over that. Anyway, explanatory power. The theory is quite easy to explain. You seek self-interest. Publicity. Is this theory teachable? Should this theory be a mainstream ethical theory? Imagine this. Imagine if this were a mainstream ethical theory. Government laws, regulations, pollution might simply be suggestions. Let's say that you no longer have to do an emission test on your vehicle. The environment becomes more polluted and less livable. So from here, we'll complete it with contractarianism. The two thieves theory example: contracts rely on trust, but if you can't trust, contracts rely on trust. But if I can't trust you contracts rely on trust, but I can't trust you because you are pursuing your own self-interest.